Hey everyone, this is Lomi, and I am about to go off on an art tangent, so hang tight. So my parents got me a light pad for Christmas, and I've been wanting to use it, but with moving and everything, I didn't have a chance until recently. I had this idea for drawings where I did a bunch of big bookmarks that had a bunch of my book characters. On the bottom I would put a banner that declared one of their roles in the story. I really wanted to do these with paint, ideally watercolor, but I don't have any watercolors right now, so I'm going to see if I can get a little bit of a watercolor look using gouache paint. They inadvertently ended up looking a little bit like tarot cards, which was completely unintentional, but I'm just gonna roll with it. I still really like the design. The first one I decided to do was Firal. Not for any particular reason, I just ended up drawing her bookmark and Rune's bookmark first. So it was either him or her. Even though I really like the look of watercolor paintings, I find that I tend to be a little bit too structured in the way that I work. I'm used to working with oil paint and acrylic paints, and I usually try to over-render, so my paintings always end up looking a little bit stiff. They don't always have that flowing grace that you see with watercolor. Even though I usually dress the doll in blue, I'm putting Firal in a yellow dress because that's the dress that she's wearing at the beginning of the first book. Since I have her drawn holding her lantern, which is a scene from the first book, I decided that would be a fun thing to do. Originally, I had planned to use a limited palette for these paintings, and I was going to do all the characters in the same colors, but I don't know if I'm going to stick with that or not. I also planned to do about 8 of these, and I really doubt that I'll see that through to the end. I think if I can get both Rune and Firal done, that'll be a big achievement. As much as I love doing artwork, I don't really have much time to devote to it anymore, and sometimes I really miss it. There was a time where I would draw something or paint something practically every day, and now I spend most of my time working on my dolls or working on writing. I don't regret that at all, because writing has always been my first passion. But I always did really enjoy expressing myself through art and using artwork to bring the characters in my stories to life. So there are times that I look back and I just really miss having the time to devote to that. I started the year with the intention of making a more concentrated effort to work on my artwork, but then we ended up doing the whole moving thing, so that ended up a little bit skewed. I did make a point, though, of getting myself a copy of Clip Studio Paint, because that's what my husband and my sister use, and they really enjoy it. I thought that if I got myself a new art program, then I would feel obligated to use it. And I do, but I mostly haven't had the time to use it yet. So I end up just feeling bad because now I have this art program that's going to waste. Fortunately, it was a whole $25, so it's not the end of the world. I did this line art digitally, and I printed it off as I showed at the beginning of the video. I used Clip Studio Paint to do the line art. I had originally meant to do the whole thing digitally, but then when I started looking at the aesthetics I wanted, the texture of the watercolor was going to be really difficult to get convincingly, at least digitally, so I ended up deciding to go with traditional media instead. Even though I feel like I'm more accurate with digital media, I feel like I get a lot more done with traditional media. I tend to work fast and loose even though I go for more structured looks, and that ended up having me mess up the hair, and it bled onto her face. So her face ended up being kind of weirdly misshapen, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to correct it or not. I'll do my best, and that's one of the reasons that I like working with gouache, because when I screw it up, I can go back over with more gouache and try to fix my mistakes. Another reason I like gouache is because I can work from dark to light, which I'm used to doing with digital media and with my acrylics. It's really hard for me to think in the reverse like you do with watercolor, where you start with your lightest colors and then you work in the shadows. When I work digitally, I almost always start with a mid-tone and then add a little bit of shadow, but mostly focus on bringing out the lighter colors. You probably noticed my paints off to the side, but I'm using the Artisa gouache for this. On the whole, I like it pretty well. I wasn't sure if I would like it or not because it's a little bit softer than the Holbein gouache that I've used for other illustrations, but I do feel like it has a good opacity, and one thing that I really like is that I can now mix this with the watercolor pencils for finishing work, and I'll have uniform colors because they use the same pigments for the different colors between products. The outer frame that I'm using for this picture I drew first and decided to use for all of the images because I am lazy, and that also helps me unify something between the images, even if I end up not using the same color palette for all of them. Another reason I've wanted to spend some time doing traditional art is I would really like to be able to come up with some cover illustrations for my books. I would love to try to get them published next year, but publishing is really cost prohibitive when you try to do it yourself. I've spent so much time and effort on preparing to establish my own publishing house so I can do everything correctly. I'll have my own imprint, I'll buy my own ISBNs, I'll have my own distributors, I may end up with like a stock of pre-printed books in my house. Fortunately, I have a library space where I can keep them. The most expensive part of the process is editing, but that leaves cover art, and the kind of cover art that I like typically runs between $2,000 and $3,000 per illustration, and I am going to need a minimum of 5. So obviously the best solution is for me to learn how to do it myself. Honestly, I think the expense is the biggest thing that has held me back from getting these books published. And I think the expense is part of what makes traditional publishing look so appealing to so many authors. I tried to go with traditional publishing. I spent a lot of time sending queries, and I actually had a brief stint where I worked for a small publisher, a small traditional publisher, and it was kind of a horrible experience. I could say a lot about that, but I've already kind of rambled on a bit, so I might save that for another video because I'm running out of time. If you want to hear about it though, be sure to let me know, and I will be happy to share in a different video. In the meantime, all I've really been able to do is work on my actual writing, and I've spent so much time revisiting these books, re-editing and redoing parts of writing that were not as strong. I've spent so much time trying to improve my prose, and sometimes I sit back and I look at that and I think I still have so far to go, and it would be really nice to be able to hand it off to somebody else and be like, here, you fix it. But at the same time, I don't want to sacrifice that kind of freedom, and that's the whole point of trying to make my own imprint to begin with. But I'll get there eventually. It's a long road. The important part is that it will get out there someday. The first time I painted the border, I wanted to do a gold and silver trim, and I ended up not really liking the way that the gold looked, so I went back over it with kind of a pearl finish. I think it's like pearl ivory or something like that. It really softened the look, and I prefer that, so I think I'm actually going to alternate these colors and do this color in the back and then the silver in the front for the characters who are on what is considered the other side. I don't know. Just a little visual unification. Toward the end here, I switched to using the watercolor pencils like I said, and I go back over my initial sketch lines to kind of bring everything all together. This is a lot easier in Photoshop, where I can just set the layer to transparent pixels or locked pixels or whatever it is and paint over it. but this is an okay approximation. In the future, I might try to sketch with a lighter pencil, or maybe do my initial drawing in colored pencil. Or watercolor pencil, I don't know. Something would work better than this. I think the biggest issue for me is going to be learning to let go and let the paint do what it wants and not stick to this really tightly structured idea that I have in my head. Because I think if I gave the paint more freedom, I would end up being happier with the results. It should look a little bit more whimsical. So in order to do that, I may need to learn to set the paint free. I might try that in another painting. And eventually I may redo this one, because that's the cool thing about the light pad. I can now make infinite copies of this and keep doing it until I find one that really works. But that's enough art rambles for now. I think I'm out of video for dialogue, so I'll stop here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.